Carl, do we have any guests?
I do not see any on Zoom. Got all members here.
No, none in here either. So, okay,
Okay.
one less thing we have to worry about.
Right.
Not that that's a good thing. We like guests.
Yeah, we do.
Well, let's get started since we are recording. A couple of announcements, probably more than a couple this time. I usually have a couple, but maybe four or five tonight. I wanted to kind of give everybody an update on the member show, which is the main reason that Megan is here tonight. We ended up having 56 images submitted, and 19 members submitted, I should say, 56 images total, so that's great. Human nature for most everyone to wait until the very end, but we got some great participation, and I'm really excited. Some important dates still are acceptance notices will go out June 26th. June 26th. So a couple weeks. Art drop-off will be August 13th, and the exhibition opens on August 14th. I'm just putting those out there so you guys can get that on all y'all's radar.
And Kyle, do you want to clarify what an acceptance notice is?
So you'll get, each one of you will get an email from Josh Berkowitz at the lab on Santa Fe saying that your piece was accepted. This is kind of a unique show because everyone's piece is getting accepted for this show. That's not true of all gallery shows. Not everybody gets accepted. In fact, this is probably the exception rather than the rule. Not probably, it is. Is there anything I should add to that?
No, I was just wanting to clarify, basically all the images have been accepted for the show. If you submitted and you paid your money, then, you're in the show. But the acceptance would be, I assume, that Josh is going to be hanging your artwork.
Right, yeah, right, because there is, right, yeah, exactly.
Don't you say not all of them are gonna be?
So I think there's room, if I recall the number, room for 30 pieces on the wall. And those pieces that don't get hung on the wall will get played on a monitor like this, in a sort of slideshows kind of thing.
Okay, so if we are not amongst the 30 that will be hanging on the wall, it will be displayed online.
Mhm.
And in which case we will not receive an acceptance notice on the 26th.
No, I think we still will. Actually, Aaron, I don't know. I honestly don't know about that because if my stuff gets accepted, but it's not gonna hang on the wall, then I don't have to frame it.
Right.
That's probably what's going on here. I wish Ben was on to help clarify this, but he's not.
Yeah, that is something we need to clarify with Ben and with Josh too. So that when the notices go out, they're specific.
Yeah. Okay, duly noted. Speaking of the lab on Santa Fe, I'll just mention that they have a show starting this weekend called The Unknown. And that opening is this Friday at 6:30. So from 6:30 to 8:30, they have an opening. I would encourage you guys, if you're not doing anything, to go check it out. Just to see the space, and I know some of us made it to the gallery opening that he had shortly after he did his presentation. But this is just another opportunity. One of our members has a piece hanging in this show that opens on Friday, so that's pretty cool. Another reason to go check it out. Yeah, so there you go. Let's see, I wanted to for those of you who haven't paid yet for the member show, there's a handful of you. I'm not making fun of Erin, but she mentioned to me even before the meeting started that she hasn't paid yet, so I'll say.
That has changed.
Aaron,
I feel like right now.
Aaron's paid, all right.
Fabulous.
But Stuart Little, our treasurer, asked me to bring it up. He did get a payment from somebody called.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is that we got a Scooby-Doo mystery here. It was labeled Local Messenger LLC. So if you are the owner of the business or the business account for Local Messenger LLC, please let us know who you are. So Stuart can reconcile the numbers.
Stuart thinks that it could either be Melissa, Jeanette, or Ben. That's his, oh, there's Stuart popping on right now. That's his, sort of Scooby sense talking to him there. But regardless, whoever owns Local Messenger LLC, please reach out to Stuart at treasurer@focuscolorado.com and let her know that you are that person.
Bingo.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. Still, so as you guys all know, that I'm looking for somebody to take over key holder responsibility, and tech person, whatever that means. Gary has stepped up to say that he will do it when he can. Erin says she's gonna do it when she can. Bob Bartlett has said he might be able to do it some. What I think we might do just quickly is, Erin and I were talking about this tonight at Nukes, is do some sort of sign up sheet, spreadsheet kind of thing, maybe, so that those of you who want to help out when you can, we can actually kind of tag team this. So that's where we're at with that. Ideally, we get somebody who can do it every time, like Bill Williams did for approximately 35 years. But that'd be the goal. But if we can't get that, then a tag team kind of thing is good. I want to be really clear about this. There are two bins similar to the size of, well, they're not similar, exactly the size of what we put the name tags in. So those of you who have been here and seen the name tag bin, there's another one of those bins that I use to carry like this cable that's on the floor to do the audio and whatever. Plus, you would need to bring your own laptop to set this all up. I just want to be really clear because Gary was caught sort of unawares about bringing his laptop and setting up all that. So I don't mean to be vague or ambiguous. I want to be very clear about this. So if anybody has any questions about this job, please feel free to reach out to me. One more thing. I wanted to plug a meetup that Bob Corson, fellow member Bob Corson, or member, not fellow member, well, he's a fellow member, but member Bob Corson has, he's doing a photo walk through his meetup group called Metro Denver Photography Meetup Group. There's a $12, I believe, $12 a year fee to join that meetup group. But he's doing a really cool photo walk on July 15th called the annual Shrine Pass Wildflowers Walk, which apparently he's been doing for many years. I just wanted to put that out there. I think that could be a really cool opportunity for those of you who want to get up above tree line or maybe just around tree line and look at some wildflowers up there on Shrine Pass. I personally don't know where that is, but it's in Colorado. It's near here.
It doesn't go above tree line.
Yeah, it doesn't. I realize that you can't have wildflowers above tree line, so.
Oh, no, there are.
Oh,
But the Shrine Pass Road doesn't go
oh,
that high.
you can have wildflowers above tree line. All right. This is why I do street photography.
Flowers.
So,
Flowers don't grow on the streets.
yeah, well, not on the streets, right? So that's really cool. You need to have you would have a meetup account, which is free to set up, and then join Bob's Metro Denver Photography Meetup Group to learn more about it. It's not a free, like I said, it's not a free thing, so I'm holding back some of the details, but it sounds like it would be really cool. That's all I got. Carl, do you have anything?
And our competition in a couple of weeks is upside down. I've gotten some interesting photos already. And for those of you who took a peek at the June newsletter, I did have a link in there to a page on 52frames.com because that's where I got the idea for the upside down. And I just wanted to mention that although there are a bunch of images on that page, they all would not qualify for our competition. Some of them would be rejected. So use it for ideas, but don't necessarily copy something that's there.
Good to know. Yeah, I think that's going to be a fun one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm excited for that. All right. Our presenter tonight is Megan Coleman with Fascination Street. Fascination, what is it?
Fascination Street Fine Art and Denver Custom Frames.
Thank you.
Yep.
So Megan was introduced to me through our club's vice president, Joy Lindholm, and that's how I got hooked up with her. So I'm really grateful that Megan's here to give us all sort of a rundown of how to make our, like we all show our work digitally all the time. We do it every month. Anybody who submits photos for our competition, our monthly competitions, we are all, anybody who is on social media, we're all really good at sharing our stuff digitally. But printing by itself is a whole nother thing. Megan's here to talk to us more about once we have our photograph printed, then what? Yeah, Megan, go for it.
Okay, so I do have a presentation,
Okay.
so I'm gonna try to do this the best that I can.
Yeah, I can come look over your shoulder and. Great. Oh. You got it going on.
Like, it's been a hot minute since I've done this, but I have done this
Doing
before.
awesome.
Okay,
Let me get rid of that, those video things on the side. I'm not gonna wear flip flops to a meeting ever.
or do, it's more fun that way.
You can speak up at anybody. We can follow you in the dark.
Is it better if I stand for y'all to see?
Whatever's comfortable
Okay.
for you, because nobody in Zoom land can see you.
Okay. That works. Okay, so I've got lots of stuff for us to discuss. But in general, kind of a look at what we're going to be talking about, a little introduction to me. We're going to talk about why would you frame anything in the first place, the overall anatomy of a frame or framed project, and then we're going to kind of get into the meat of most of this, which is going to be discussing framing design. I'm going to talk a little bit about preservation specifically in framing, what y'all can do at home, some good resources for that. And then I've got some extra space for some Q&As, but feel free to ask questions throughout this as well.
May I just say, if you're gonna, throughout your presentation, if you're gonna show us things.
Yeah.
I think those people on Zoom do have an option to see the video as well, so do sort of make sure that you're going on the guys that they can see you.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of this too is just to kind of to play with. But yeah, I'll show samples and stuff as we go through. Yeah, on my table I have some frame corner samples. I've got some fillet samples, some liner samples, and some matte samples. I'll kind of show those as we get there in the presentation. But so me, my name is Megan Coleman. I am the head framer at Denver Custom Frames, which is in association with Fascination Street Fine Art, the art gallery. I have been framing commercially for about 2.5 years now, but been involved in that and art and stuff for many, many years. My background particularly is in photography, funny enough, and then also art history. So, and then I'm currently pursuing getting my certified picture framer certification. So that is a thing that is possible and that is out there. There's a whole association for picture framing specifically. And it's the Professional Picture Framers Association. So lots of good information there too. So to start, so why would we frame things? And this answer kind of changes depending on who you are. So as a consumer, it's a really nice way to be able to display your items of importance, things that matter to you, preserve those items as well. But it also adds value. So when you have something that has a monetary value of a certain amount, the framing actually adds to that monetary value as well. As a framer, the biggest reasons that I do is clients want me to. The preservation of these items is also super important. So a big part of why I do it personally is that I like to preserve things for other people. And then there's also the artistic elements. So there's a lot of design things that we can do with framing that can really add and enhance pieces. But mostly for you guys, for artists, the biggest reason oftentimes that artists are doing this is to display their own works. So for things like a show or an exhibit, but it's also super helpful to protect your art. So having a well-done frame construction can help protect your art and preserve it for years to come. It also adds value, like I said, so whenever you're, say, selling your work, you can also sell it for a higher price point because you have framed it. And then also it's really easy for shows, sales, etc. because you have it, it's ready to pop up. It's easily contained. You're not having to worry about flipping through prints that might just kind of be in flips or anything like that. And in general, a lot of shows have a standard that it needs to be framed in some way so they can pop it up on a wall. And like I said, keep your art around for longer. So the preservation side of things is super helpful in helping your art continue to last and be able to stick around longer. So specifically, why do we do custom framing rather than just like regular framing? Like, what's the difference there? So in general, the material quality is going to be probably the biggest difference between some frame shops and custom frame shops. A lot of non-custom frame shops are going to use either MDF or extruded plastics to make their frames. And so those basically are going to be a lightweight alternative, which is super cheap to make, but it's very easy that it falls apart. And a lot of those, instead of, for example, like if wood starts to kind of comes across in like chips, if you've ever had like something wood fall apart, a lot of those will start to crumble almost into like sand. And so when your frame starts to fall apart, there's not really a way to put it back together because it's disintegrated basically. The other thing is going to be design limitations. So for example, if you're picking up something from a Michaels, you're going to have a lot less options to pick out a frame than you would in a custom shop that has hundreds of frames, hundreds of vendors, etc. The other thing with this is standard sizes. So I know a lot of my photography is not in standard sizes, which is nice because it means I can do what I want with the creative, like with my creative methods and everything, but it means it's really hard to find a frame that's going to work for it. The other thing too is sometimes items are not actually prepared to be framed. So for example, canvases are oftentimes shipped, especially when you like order something or buy something from a gallery, it's going to be shipped, not stretched. In that case, there's not really a way that you can just frame it yourself and put it up on your wall. There's not enough substance to that to just kind of pop into a frame. And so in that case, you would need to go to a frame shop that can stretch a canvas to be able to put it in a frame for you. The other biggest thing, especially as an artist or an art collector, for custom framing is that as a custom frame shop, we are insured for art and we do not ship it out. So Michaels, a lot of people use Michaels custom framing, no shade there, but Michaels.
I think I hear some shade.
There's a little bit of shade. I will say this is coming from someone who I've had a lot of things framed at Michaels and had them ruined and then sat there and cried over it later. So, but they will ship your art out. So if you think it's in the back of your local Michaels that you took it to, it's not. They shipped it to a warehouse. I could not tell you where, and they're working on it there. Now they might lose it in the mail on the way there. They might lose it in the mail on the way back. They don't keep track of that. They're not sending it with all of the labels and the following information and all of that stuff. So you don't really know where it's at. Whereas like a local frame shop, like for example, my frame shop, if you were kind of sad that your piece, you weren't going to see your piece for a while, you could come in every single day and I could pull out your piece and put it on the table and let you look at it for a few hours and then put it back. And we can do that every day until it's finished being framed. You know exactly where it is, you know who's taking care of it, you know what hands are touching it, that kind of thing. So that's just a little bit of the difference there. So anatomy of a frame project. So just a kind of a little tester to see where we're at. So this is a project that I framed for the gallery that I work for. So how many layers or elements do you all think are in this piece? And this is like with no knowledge before, and I'm going to get into this and explain it and stuff, but how many layers do you think there are?
1.
Okay, I hear 5.
6.
I'm thinking 7 or 8.
Yeah, same here.
Okay, 7 or 8.
Yeah.
Okay,
That doesn't include the piece of artwork, right? You're not even.
I am including a piece of artwork.
I'm gonna go 9.
Okay, 9. Okay. So here's kind of what a frame is going to look like. So working from the outside in, we have your frame, also called your molding. You're going to have your glass or acrylic, your glazing. And this is like a very simple sort of straightforward frame design, which we're going to get into some more complex ones too as we go. Then a mat board, you have your artwork or item that is being framed. The mounting board, that is what you're attaching that piece to. The backing board, which is providing stability to your piece. And then a dust cover, which goes on the back. There are additional framing elements, and I'll get into these a little bit more later too, such as fabric liners or fillets, and these are things that could be added. You can always add multiple mats, you can add liners, fillets, whatever, to that kind of stack and line up. So an example, so this framing project has the canvas in the middle that has been stretched. It has an inner frame, which is this gold one. It has a sort of red liner and then an outer frame. This example, again, another option of ways that we can like mix things, has a fillet on the inside, a navy blue liner, and then an outer frame. Here's a couple more. So the one on the left has a fillet on the inside, a mat around it, and then a outer frame. And then our option on the right has 3 mats that are layered. It has the glass, and then it has an outer frame. So if we look back at this project, based on what I have now said, do you have a different answer for how many layers you think are involved in this?
3.
3, okay.
Obviously, it was not 3.
I was 10.
300.
Sort of feels like 300.
It's a lot, it's a dozen, I bet, or something like, it's just
Yeah.
a lot of mass fabric. Yeah.
Yeah, so this one has 10 layers. So working from the outside in, we have a black frame, we have the glass or glazing that's on the inside, the green frame, a white mat, a black mat, the art itself. There's then a pedestal, which is adding depth to the piece so that the art is actually raised from the back. The red mat, which acts as our mounting board in this foam core, which is the backing board, which you cannot see from the front, and then a dust cover over the back. So a lot of these elements are things that you can visually see and are adding a lot to the design, but there's some of these too that are almost, you don't really notice them, but they are making a difference, or things that are there that are super important, but are not visually seen. So like the foam core is adding a ton of support to this whole system and that everything inside of the frame, we're not necessarily seeing that. So there are elements of this that are not just there for the aesthetic purposes, although a lot of it is for the aesthetics. So framing design. The best way and the way that I suggest anybody starts a frame design is to begin with your definition. So what are we framing? Are we framing a photograph? Are we framing a canvas? Are we framing a jersey? Each of these different mediums of art has different needs, especially on the preservation side, or even in the design side. Like there's certain design elements that we can't use with certain art forms and stuff like that. So knowing what we're framing first is going to inform what. The next is going to be, who are we framing? So are we framing for ourselves? And then the design is entirely up to you. What do you like? Do you like it to look one way or the other? If you're framing for a client, that's going to be something completely different. It's all about what the client wants. Some of this too is like a gift. I have a lot of clients bring something in that they're getting framed, but it's for somebody else. So we have to take into account who it's going to in the end. Sometimes if you're entering things in a show, there are show requirements for your framing. And in that case, we need to meet those requirements as well. So all sorts of options there. And then the last thing is going to be, why are we framing this? So are we framing it for personal use? If so, is it going to be part of a gallery wall where it needs to not be more important than anything else, or it needs to match? Or is this going to be the centerpiece in your house? Does it need to take up a whole wall and be very grand in the framing design? Again, is it for a show or exhibition where you have guidelines that it needs to be hung a certain way or have the certain hardware to be put up on a wall in the right way? And then the other thing too is like, are we framing this for selling it? A lot of times when we're selling a piece of art, especially like shows and exhibitions that are specifically designed for sales, They're going to be framed slightly differently than how you might frame your stuff, because a lot of people are like more plain frame styles or more simplistic framing. So all of these, and like knowing the definition of where you're starting and where you're going to go, is going to help you make decisions at each of the design steps. So then it gets to the more fun part, which is the actual creativity and designing side of things. So as you guys know, I'm sure, making your own art and everything, we've got design principles and elements of design. These are going to include things like balance, contrast, emphasis, movement, rhythm, hierarchy, white space, unity, variety, alignment, proportion, and repetition. All of these, and maybe one or two aren't super applicable, but pretty much all of these you can use in your framing design. So it's going to be a lot like designing pretty much any other art form that you have. Same thing with our elements of design, where we have line and shape and form and space and texture and value and color. These are all things that are at play, or possibilities to be at play when you're designing your frame project. So we have, and the way that we're going to do that is through our framing elements. So we have moldings and frames. We have mat boards, we have fabric liners, we've got fillets, but even beyond that, we have different windows, different window shapes, different window layouts, mat details. So for example, that top right picture is a French mat, where it's drawn in pen and used different pigments to color. The layout, if you're having multiple things within that framing design, the layout adds a lot to your design. But also depth, and depth is something that I think a lot of people forget within framing projects, is like we can add multiple layers to the piece and the framing to create more visual interest using depth. So just to start, so for this kind of section, I'm going to talk a little bit about the different things that we can pick, and then also like what recommendations are and how to start for picking these things. In general, for all of this, there are always going to be multiple frame designs that work and look really nice. At the end of it, it's going to come down to your design definition and who the framing is for, which is the final decision. There's hundreds of ways that we can frame something and it'll look nice, but it comes down to that definition, which is kind of why we start there. So your three main considerations for frame are going to be color, style, and scale. So typically the best place to start in general for all of this is going to be removing your nose. So for example, I brought this kind of navy piece that is like navy and silver. I don't know if you all can see it, but just kind of a general piece that I had. So for framing something like this, for picking a frame, I would say I don't want a gold frame on it personally. I don't like gold frames. Or not necessarily in this case, there's no gold in the piece. So I'm going to eliminate golds as a possibility. I also don't want super brightly colored frames. I don't want a red frame on this. I don't think that would look very nice personally. So I would eliminate that. And I would keep eliminating down to where I have the few options that I like. So for example, I have brought silver frames and black frames mostly for what I like. And I think would go with this piece. So I've narrowed it down. A lot of my pool, and even I think I have a white one in here too, narrowed my pool down so that I have gotten rid of, for example, like my frame shop has a couple thousand corner samples, but I've eliminated huge sections of these already off the bat. The easiest way to go for designing for something like this is going to be starting off with your nose and getting rid of stuff like that. So for color, colors are probably one of the easiest ways to eliminate options. A lot of your frame shops are going to be laid out kind of like this, where they have a section of gold and they have a section of silver and they have a section of color and that kind of thing. So depending on your piece, you can kind of automatically start there and just be like, oh, I can ignore this whole section of this space and I can ignore this section and that section. And then you can start to get into some of the more stylistic things and the scale side of things. So in general, for deciding the color though, a good suggestion is to look at the art, determine if the color scheme of it is.
What happened to the audio in the room? We can't quite hear.
There we go. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, Megan, as you were.
What did y'all hear last?
Warm tones.
Perfect.
Cool tones, I will say.
Yeah, you're talking about picking the right color for the image and the things you need to consider.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, so the best way to go for color is going to be deciding if your piece is cool toned or warm tone. So the example that I brought in is kind of a navy blue color, which is going to be a cool tone. So I would immediately begin by eliminating my warm tones. So that's going to be your golds, your yellows, your reds, your oranges, even like some warm toned woods I probably would avoid. Kind of start from there. Something else to consider is going to be the subject of the art, the age or era of the art, and the mood of the art that is being framed. Each of these can also inform what you may pull. So, for example, the era of a piece may suggest a specific frame style. Historical works may look best in a frame that is styled from the same era. So this is why a lot of times if you go to museums and they say have a Rembrandt up, they're going to have one of the more elaborate gold frames around it because that was the framing at the time. Something to consider with this too is that frames in general have different shapes, different profiles, and overall affect how the project will look, how it will sit on the wall, and that kind of thing. So I've brought a few examples of stuff, and most of these are relatively angular, but kind of this one we can see is sort of curved on the outside. So instead of being just a flat square, so this one kind of has a curve, and like this one has the sort of rounded edge, which can especially be seen if you look at the end of the frame sample. It kind of shows you what that shape looks like a little bit more. So some of that can kind of decide what you want to pull based on the style that you like. In general, historical ones are going to often be more ornate, oftentimes gold, honestly, and have a little bit more detail in the frame themselves. Whereas contemporary styles tend to lean more towards flat, square, maybe some visual interest, but not a lot of detail.
You might explain to those on Zoom.
Yeah.
Exactly what that poster is showing, because they have seen the color, but they don't know what's actually in it.
Yeah, so this poster is the night sky from when my husband and I got married. So it is a contemporary piece. It's navy, it has some like silver foiling on it, but a very contemporary piece in general. And I think you could, if you wanted to frame it in a like more ornate historical style, you definitely could. That's not my personal style. So what I pulled is not necessarily that direction, but again, there's lots of ways that you can make whatever you want work. It just kind of depends on that brief and whoever it's going for. In general, I often think it's best to get a few different options that you think would work and then move on to your next element. A lot of this, because we want our final design to be super cohesive, it's better to have a bunch of options and then play with them, piecing them together, than decide this is my frame and then be stuck with it the whole way through. So in general, I've pulled a whole bunch of frame options that I think are all things that could look nice. They're all slightly different, but I can kind of play with that when I get to the next section. The last element that's going to be important is scale. So in general, this will be informed by where it's going, the size of the piece itself, and the weight of the project. So for example, here I have some that are going to be wider. So this is about a 2-inch frame. I've got some in here that are pretty small on the face. So a wider sample and a smaller sample. I also have some that are tall or small on the front, but then are actually very tall frames. So all of these kind of are things that they're not super skinny where I would be worried about them. The biggest concern with scale is going to be your frame not being able to hold the weight of everything that's inside of it and it falling apart on your wall, which is very sad, and it breaks my heart when it happens. So in general, we try to stick with one that is substantial enough to hold the weight of the full thing inside of it. This often means as your piece gets bigger or the thing inside gets heavier, we go with a wider frame or a taller frame to make sure that there's enough substantial weight to the frame itself to hold the rest of the package. But this can also be a design element too. So sometimes we'll see really small things in really thick, ornate frames, and that can be kind of an element that you can play with as well. A lot of times the scale of your frame can emphasize the importance of a piece. So if you want to say that a small piece is actually the most important piece on your wall, if you put it in a larger, more ornate frame, it's going to pull people into realizing that that one is the important frame. So it's kind of something that you can play with based on, again, that design definition and what your goal is for the piece. Something that can be included in this too is going to be visual weight. So if it's a darker piece or it has heavy texture or big shapes, it may look like a heavier piece and have a sort of heavier visual weight. And that oftentimes can lean towards a wider frame being nice because it looks heavier. It looks like it needs something more substantial to hold it. And part of this too is considering as we get larger, even if we're working with something lightweight, if we have a project that's an 8x10, a 2-inch frame is going to look proportionally decently sized, kind of big on it. But if we get something that's a 46x48 and then put it in a 2-inch frame, it's not going to look like there's actually that much frame on it. So something to consider with this too is like, how does the overall scale of this relate to each other? Like, is it going to look like we have a really small frame on it when we get to these like really large sizes? The other side of this is going to be depth. So the depth of the frame allows for either 3-dimensional items. So like I do a lot of jerseys or like sculptural pieces. And so it allows us to work with those pieces. But also depth is another element that you can be playing with. So even if you have something that's flat by adding like pedestals or buildups or different layers, we can recess things in the frame, we can push them right up against the glass and that kind of thing to help create things like hierarchy and stuff within your frame. And so in that case, you would need a taller frame to be able to do kind of play with elements like that. Let's see. So a good example of this is it's the same piece. Particularly, I don't think any of these frames are bad. I think there's a lot of clients that I have that would like every single one of these. But there's definitely one that I prefer, and I imagine there's one that you all would prefer. There's one that would probably be good for shows. There's one that would probably be good for a certain person's home and a different person's home. So although there's tons of options of things that we can make work with any of these, it really is going to come down to that design definition.
Question
Yeah.
first. So this is going to be the first time for some of us for the gallery showing.
Yes.
Is there one particular color or frame that might be kind of neutral for any audience?
Yeah.
Would a black frame be good for just about anybody? Or
Yeah.
a white frame?
So in general, the most common frames are going to be either a black or a white frame. In general, especially for photography, the like historical method of showing photography is going to be a plain white mat and a plain black frame. Now this is a really great option. Like there's a lot of interesting things you can even do just with that.
So those are pretty safe.
Yeah, they're safe options. In general, your safest options are always going to be leaning towards those neutrals. It's a lot of times when we lean into color that things can get a little more iffy on if somebody would like it or not. But there's a lot of ways even within that we can kind of play it safe there as well. But yeah, by far, black frames are probably the one that I see the most often. In general, it's hard for it to compete, and it's goes with most people's stuff.
Black and white photography.
Yeah, lots of black and white with black and white photography, even color. Everything goes in a black and white, which is nice, but it's very limiting and doesn't necessarily add anything to your piece. And so if you want to lean that way, we totally can, but we can also do things to like enhance and put colors and stuff like that. So just knowing what your options are is really The most common mat is probably going to be a plain white paper mat.
Keep it simple, because we don't know the home it's going into, and if we don't sell it, we're stuck with it ourselves.
So you better like it, and it better look good on the wall. I feel like for those, in general, your neutrals are gonna be your safest bet. Not necessarily doing anything super outlandish. But also like a lot of times if people see, especially this happens at our art gallery a lot, where if we frame our art in a white matte black frame, people will say, oh, I would have to reframe that for it to work for me, and I don't want to do that. So it's something to consider too, that like, depending on which way you go and who's your clientele and what they're looking at, they might also dislike that it's a very boring framing and think that they would have to redo it. Or not necessarily boring, but like simple. So it kind of depends. And a lot of this too comes to like, it's your personal decision. If you hate a black frame and a white mat, don't do it. If you love that and you think that everything should be framed that way, do it that way. Because part of this too is like, at the end of all of this, it is still your artistic vision, and this is still a representation of you and your art. And so like, what matters is that you at the end of the day are happy with what you've come up with and that you like how it looks. Because if you don't like it, other people probably aren't going to like it either. So with that said, there's also ways that we can do things like stacking frames. So in this example, there are multiple frames. So the white frame is one, and then we have a gold frame on the outside of that. So there's options, even if, say, we did do a white matte black frame, we could do potentially two black frames that are different and have texture differences or colors, like contrast differences, or even like sheen differences. And that's a really way to add interest, really easy way to add interest without necessarily having to separate from that norm. We can also do more creative things, or like things that are a little further from the norm. So for example, I did this one for a client where they wanted half of the frame in this lime green and half of it in this like light yellow color. And they were incredibly happy with it. They loved it. It was fun to work on. It was fun to do. So
Bet you haven't done another one like that.
I haven't. I have done more commonly I've done black and white, where they'll do either like the two, I've done mostly for verticals where the two longs are black and the two shorts are white. A lot of people like that too. And it works really well on certain pieces. I did one for an original Beetlejuice poster that we did that for, and it worked really well with the piece. Don't have a picture of that one, but.
Okay, I have to ask a question. You've seen a ton probably. Have you ever had a client that insisted on doing something and you just shook your head and went, you take it away from the art by playing with all the other stuff?
Yes.
Yeah. So that can happen.
Yes. We have a term that we love to use in our private notes that is customer-driven design. And a lot of times so my boss doesn't come down and be like, what are you all doing? Like, do I have to teach you more design stuff? It's like, no, we know what we're doing. But sometimes the client wants what the client wants, and I can lay out things that I think would look nice and the designs would look nice, or things that go with it, or I think would go with it. And the client is like, no, I hate all of that. Give me this random thing. And we'll do that too. Like, again, because it comes down to that design definition, like, if that's what you want, I will do it. I will not like it, and I would never take it home with me. I might not post it to our social media, but it exists. So I've had a lot of those. I've also had some pieces that we've just had to turn away of like, I'm sorry, like, we can't do that. Or it happens most often with like historical pieces where like we are not the best people to be framing this thing. And so I'm going to be very honest with you and tell you, this is a cool piece. I would love to work on this. I'm not able to do that. And here are some resources for where you should go instead.
Okay.
And I think some of that is too is finding a frame shop. And there's a lot of really good ones in Denver, but one that will be honest with you about that kind of thing and is not going to push themselves and get into sticky situations or ruin your art or anything like that. So the next thing, which again is going to be your like most common element that people play with, is going to be matting. So there are hundreds of thousands of mat options with different insides, different outsides, different fabrics, different colors. There's metallics, there's hand wrapped fabric mats that kind of look like this. I've got papers, and I've got papers that are thicker and I've got papers that are thinner, like so many options for mats. Especially because pretty much most art forms, with the exception of like canvases that have been stretched, can use mats. And so they're a really nice way to add. Also, in general, I'm someone who frames on a budget. Mats are going to be the easiest place to get more bang for your buck. In general, mats, they aren't as expensive overall, but you can get them to add a lot, and layering them together can add a lot. And so you can do a little bit more complex on your mats with a more simple or cheaper frame, and it's not going to break your bank in the same way that buying like a really expensive frame would. In general, matting is going to be the border between the art and the frame. It can be used either between the art or even as a background to the art. A lot of times what we do at my work is we float mat things, which is instead of having your mat that has like a window cut out and then your pieces behind it, it's where you actually put the mat on top, or the art on top of the mat. And so instead of like covering any of your like paper or anything like that, it's just entirely directly on top. And so that's always an option too. In general, the best thing about mats is that they're going to provide visual relief. So between your frame and your item and stuff like that, using space and empty space is really, really helpful. And mats are the best way to do this, where like some of them are much busier, but some of them are very plain. And so they can kind of give your eye that visual relief, which also helps bring people into the actual image that we're working with. In general, mats can be used individually or in multiples. 1 layer and 3 layer tend to be the most common. In general, odd numbers tend to be more suggestive of design. They tend to look more balanced. They can have multiple windows or none at all. The generalizations for picking mats. In general, they should be understated enough that they don't overpower the art. You don't want people looking at your project and being like, that's a really nice mat, and then moving on. You want them to be like, oh wow, let me look at this piece. Let me look at the art. And then something else to consider too is if we're doing multiple layers, you can change how much you see of each layer. So just because, say, I want to use a blue mat, doesn't mean that I need like this. I think these are all about 4 inches thick. I don't need to see 4 inches of mat around everything. I can simply reveal a 1/4 inch of it. So I add a little bit of color without adding a ton. So that's something to consider too, is as we do with multiple layers, you can have different reveals for each of these layers. And in general, it is suggested that they are different. If they're the same and you do the same over and over, it starts to look very stripy. And so you have stripes all around your piece, which can be a lot. Similarly, just because you're using multiple layers doesn't mean you're using different colors. So a lot of times in more simplistic or like classic designs, we'll do a couple white mats even. And I would, of course, make sure they're the same white mat and everything, but you can always do multiple layers of the same color. And it adds just a little bit of visual interest where it catches some of the light. And so you have the depth element without necessarily adding another color or texture. The main element, though, of mats is going to be the colors. In general, like I said, neutrals are going to be your most commons, with blacks, grays, whites, even some browns, some tans, creams. But neutrals are not the only option. So a lot of times what we end up having or seeing is a couple colors and then a neutral on top. So you have pops of color that are included to highlight colors within the piece, but then it's finished off with a neutral on top. So that way, oftentimes it matches the rest of their house a little bit better. In general, the main consideration for matting is that the mat is not lighter, brighter, or darker than the colors within the artwork. If your mat is lighter than the art, it will make the art look dark. If your mat is darker, it will wash out the art and make it look very kind of dull and like there's not a lot of depth to that dark color. If it is brighter, similarly, it's also going to make the piece look more dull. So we want to stay kind of within the tonal range of the piece so that the piece has the brightest brights or the brightest whites and the darkest darks. And that way, that helps us pull into the piece without being like, feeling like the piece is too dull or not dark enough or not light enough. Especially with black and white photography, it's really important that you want your whites to be the whitest white and your blacks to be the blackest black. The other thing too to consider is similar to frames. If your piece is overall lighter, we often recommend that you have lighter mats. And if your piece is overall darker, we recommend that you have darker mats overall. And this kind of helps to like lean into the kind of visual tone of the piece. And so like if you have a night scene, oftentimes we'll do those in darker tones so that that way the piece speaks. And if you put like for example, a star shot on a white mat, a lot of times that white mat competes, and so it's hard to see the rest of the detail in that piece. So a great starting point for that is going to be looking at the color in the piece and then determining, for example, like if you want to involve color, which you don't necessarily have to, but pulling the 2 to 3 main colors of the piece. And oftentimes you can kind of set those reveals to be similar to how much is in the piece. So for example, if you have a scene of green trees, you could have a brown and a green, and you would have, say it's mostly leaves. So you would say you'd have a little bit more green, a little bit less brown, and then whatever else you wanted. And you can kind of use what you're seeing in the piece to inform that decision. The other thing that mats are going to have is texture. So texture is another one that within framing is really helpful to lean into. It can oftentimes really help emphasize your piece, but also can add a little bit more interest without just being plain kind of flat. The other thing too is fabric mats in general. If you're going to lean in towards the color side of matting, fabric mats are going to have brighter color and more vibrant color than paper mats are going to. So for example, not that these are the exact same color, sir, but even just between this paper and this fabric, you can see the fabric is going to be a lot more vibrant, have a lot more contrast to it. Now it does have the added element of this is like a velvet or suede almost. And so you do get some more contrast between that. But in general, all of your papers are going to be a duller color. And so you can use that to like kind of lean into that and use that to benefit your pieces. But sometimes if you're trying to match a specific color, I know like my photography, when I have nice colors, they're pretty vibrant. They're going to be more vibrant than most of our paper mats are going to be. So leaning towards those fabrics is going to be a really nice option. The last thing for textures, though, is going to be it's important that we don't take or pick patterns or textures that take away. So some of these fabric mats can get really intense with the texture. Like I think I have one that is like burlap, and like that looks great for some things, but for other things, that's a lot of texture. And so it's going to be important that when we put it with our piece, it's not going to take away from it. And that's kind of the consideration throughout all of this is like, we really want to help these pieces sing and catch interest and visual attention, but we don't ever want to take away from it. We don't want people looking at your framing. In general, the best framing is framing that kind of goes unnoticed. So this one has different frames, but the mats here, like neither of these mats are necessarily the wrong color or a bad fit, but they do lean very different directions with the piece. So different things are going to pop based on the colors that you pick. And like it will highlight different elements.
Before and after what?
This was someone's project that it was brought in like the one on the left, and then they decided to reframe it like the one on the right.
It's so much better after.
And it really brings out the color.
Yeah, it's like it's a different piece of art.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where like you have more contrast in the second one. Like we are leaning away from the neutral mats, but in this piece, it's helping emphasize the blues that are already in there. It also sort of makes the greens pop more. And then this one also has a difference of the glazing that's on it, which gets rid of the reflection, and that makes a huge difference as well. Which we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. The other thing with mats is going to be the border widths. So in general, here are 3 examples. oftentimes this comes to personal preference is like the biggest thing that I will say. With that said, in general, the thinner that we get, the more constricted the art looks within the frame. It looks like it's almost being encroached upon. Similarly, if you have artworks that are not square, and you want them to look square, if you put something, so for example, like a hand-painted cyanotype, if you hand paint that and you think it's square, but you just kind of roughly hand painted it, if you put that next to the very straight lines of a very square frame, it's going to emphasize that it's not square, and it will draw a lot more attention to the fact that it's not square. Now, sometimes that's nice and we like that, and sometimes you're like, I really wanted it to be square, and so then you're upset. So that's something to consider. In general, the most often that we do is going to be that medium matte border, where it is balanced, it's balanced within it, but it doesn't necessarily have a ton of space around it either. The general rule of thumb for this is we suggest, or it is suggested, that your matte width is 1.5 to 2 times the width of your frame. So as your frame thickness gets thicker, so would your mattes. So that way it's still not looking like it's constricting. So something in a frame that is like thin, like this, could have much less matte and still look proportionally like it's a medium matte border, whereas something like this is going to need a lot more matte for it to look proportionally like that medium one. The other thing too with this is that it's important that your matte and your frame are different widths. And this comes back to kind of what I was saying about matte reveals as well, is it starts to get really stripy, especially if you start to involve like a matte and a frame and your piece. It starts to begin to look almost like you have stripes around your piece the whole way. So by making them slightly different widths, it helps kind of break up that like stripe effect. Which again, stripes could be nice sometimes, but sometimes we don't want stripes. So for this example, I have, and this one's kind of hard to tell in the room here, but the white mat that is on top has a colored core. So it is a white mat with a pink colored core. And then the art is flow mounted on top of a like shiny gold mat. So pulling stuff from in the piece, there's kind of a whole pink section on the like bottom side of this piece that the client really loves. Their favorite color is pink, but they were like, I don't want too much pink where it pulls away from the art. So even just that slight bit of pink helped pull into the art, made our client happy, but also overall balanced with the piece. Similarly,
How unique is alternate colored cores? I've seen white core and black core, but I've never seen lots of colors as options for cores.
yeah, so there's one brand that makes them currently. So there's two things. There's one brand that makes pre-made ones, and I believe it's Crescent, but I can look. And they have a whole line of them between like white tops with colored cores, black tops with colored cores, and then colored tops with the same color core. And they're super wonderful to work with. They're really fun. They're a great way to add things and textures, or like pops of color. You can also color your own bevels instead of having a core that way, so you can paint them or dye them yourself. That's more complicated and it takes a lot of time, and it's much easier to have a mistake that way. But it's a nice fun element. I think there's only one brand that currently makes them, and they're kind of leading the market on it. Yeah, but like as far as finding them, I think you can buy directly from that brand. Something else we're going to talk a little bit about later. You can also oftentimes buy like full sheets of mat board through your frame shop. So like if you wanted to, you could come to Denver Custom Frames and say, I want a sheet of this, pull out a mat sample, and I will say, I will buy that sheet for you. I'll let you know when it comes in. And we can do that too. So like for people that want to pull out of their framing at home, or like want to explore framing at home or explore cutting mats at home or anything like that, a lot of your frame stores can supply those things. Now, some of your art stores, like I know mine and yours has a selection of that, but oftentimes they're going to carry like a white, a black, and maybe a mid-tone somewhere in there, but not necessarily like all of the options, and I have so many options. So same thing here, trying to pull colors from the piece that we liked, trying to add a little bit of contrast. So there's like a dark navy within the cross stitch that they wanted to kind of highlight. So we started with that. They liked the like neutral of the piece, but overall wanted the piece to feel very calming and kind of highlight the person that this is for loves green. So we went with like a top green mat, but it is like a fabric mat, so it has a little bit of texture to it. With that, there are additional elements. So other elements that we have are going to be things like liners, which pretty much are just corner samples, or frame samples basically, but they have fabric on them instead. So instead of being like your final finished frame, they have fabric. Fillets, which are going to be these little guys, and they will just sit inside of your frame, and they kind of stack within one another. And so they add just a little element to it, kind of like this. And there's all sorts of options for those as well. Something else is specialty mat cuts. A lot of these can be done by hand. The shop that I work at, I'm lucky enough to have a computerized mat cutter. So I put it all on the computer and it does it for me, which is great. Saves a lot of time. But there's a thing called a V-groove, which is kind of shown here on the right, which is basically two 45s that do not go all the way through your mat facing one another. So it cuts out the top of it, but exposes the inside. So in this example, it would be a black mat with a white inside, and they've cut those two opposing angles to reveal the white inside. And those can add a lot to a piece as well, where it's just a little bit of interest to your mat, where it's not competing a ton, but pulls in that color without necessarily having to add another mat or anything like that. So with all of this said, there's lots of options, and it's great to theorize and think about all these things, but by far the best way to design anything is going to be with samples. Pretty much every frame shop that I know of, I genuinely cannot think of one, would dislike you just showing up and being like, I want to like lay out this and play with this and design something. Can I just use your samples? Like we would be like, yeah, go for it. And so that's a really great way to pull a piece that you like, play with your options, see what you like, see what you don't like. A lot of these, like pretty much every brand that we use, almost all of them, have an online store. That's really wonderful. Most of those pictures are the wrong color. They're the wrong color. They don't tell you what the shape is. It's hard to visualize what it's going to look like when you lay it out with your piece. The best way to do it is to play with the things in front of you. And it's also like a really great way to narrow down your designs. It's also really satisfying to be like, I don't like this, and just put it away. So another good thing about using samples too is there's a lot of ways that you can kind of manipulate your visual field to kind of see what that might look like. So a lot of times what we'll use is two pieces of black mat, and we will, if you kind of lay out your design and say you're looking at it, if you lay your corners of your black over the edge of the sample, your brain will start to fill in what that whole project would look like, and it helps you get a really good understanding of like, when you complete this project with the layouts and the mats and stuff like this, what is that going to look like for you? And there's not really a great way to show this to the people on Zoom, but with a layout on the table, sort of having it and blocking it like this. And I can kind of show you guys that if you want to look at how that looks at the end of this. With that said, again, there's all sorts of interesting things that you can do with your fillets, your liners, etc. So this one has 4 different colors of fillet included inside. So the top fillet is red, the side is orange, the other side is going to be blue, and then the bottom is a purple fillet. And so you're able to pull different colors to splice together to kind of match the rainbow effects of this piece. So there's lots of really fun ways that we can play with these things. Like fillets in general are a really great way to add to your piece, especially because fillets can go either in your frame, they can also go under your mat. They can kind of stack with your mat, which is kind of hard to show in the air like this, but which would look kind of like that. Which is another really great way to add interest to your piece. So there's lots of different ways that we can play with these things and get really cool and interesting results. Similarly, like sometimes you'll find things that are like, oh, I love the color of this. This matches my piece perfectly. And you're just like, yep, I gotta use it. It's perfect. So for example, and it matches much better in person, but the red of this liner matches the like deep reds within the piece almost perfectly. And so it helps kind of let the piece sing, and the contrast between the blues and the red of the liner kind of highlight the cold tones of the piece. So, and that is something too, like I know I mentioned that you can lean into your color tones. All of these things that I'm suggesting too are going to be kind of like the general consensus. With all of art, there are rules, but also those rules are need to be broken. So if you want to go that way, you can. If you don't want to go that way, you do not have to. This is just kind of like a basis of what's going to look nice. But also if you really hate any of it, don't do it. It's up to you. So with that said, there's a whole other side of framing. There's a really great aesthetic side of framing that is fantastic and can do a lot of different pieces. The whole other side of framing is going to be the preservation side of things. So pretty much all of these options are going to be great options for doing your designs, making your designs look nice, making them match. But we might have different considerations when we're discussing the preservation of your piece. And some of these can lean into the preservation side of things or just be parts of it, but there are definitely other considerations. So part of this consideration is going to be the value of your piece between monetary value, which is going to be items with an established market value, which you can sell them, you have a verifiable price, etc. Or sentimental things where the items may not have any or not much of an established market value, but they mean a lot to the person. Both of these will have the same preservation concern areas and things that we need to consider within the framing. So some of this is going to be inherent faults, which is going to be faults that are specific to the artwork or the item or elements of the medium. So for example, oil paintings are prone to cracks. That's one of the inherent faults of the medium itself. We know as they get older, they tend to crack in a very specific way. And so it's often suggested, like when I'm going to frame something, I'm going to be like, hey, just to let you know, there's a very good chance that long term, while this is on your wall, it's going to start cracking. Some of these others are like some photographic processes are more light sensitive. So these might start to fade over time as they're on your wall. Sometimes there's things that the inherent faults are so intense that we would suggest not framing entirely. I know there's some photographic processes, which I can't think of the one that I'm thinking of right now, that is entirely light sensitive. Within like weeks, it would fade. And so that would be something that would be like, we can make a replication and a copy and frame it, or just not recommend we frame it at all because it would destroy the piece of art itself. The other side of this is handling, which this is something that you all consider too, is as you're getting things printed and getting ready for your show, the handling of these items and the storage of these items can also be an area for concern. The external environment is also an issue, and the internal environment or the environment inside of your frame is also an area to consider.
But question in terms of handling, would that be like hand oils and things like that?
Mm-hmm.
And so would you recommend using latex gloves or something like that?
Yes. So let's skip just a little bit. So for handling, your biggest concerns are going to be oils, friction, and mistakes, basically. So for oils, we recommend gloves. It used to be believed that you should wear white cotton gloves. That is no longer the standard. The department actually intakes your oils. And so, yeah, you're wearing cotton gloves to prevent your oils from getting on your stuff, but it can actually soak into the cotton and then get on your stuff anyways. So we do suggest a latex or any type of like surgical nitrile glove. The other part of that is going to be careful while you're moving the art. So not moving things one-handed, especially as things start to get larger. You might even want a board to support them on. In general, a lot of people, if you move too fast, will like end up ripping art, or bending corners or anything like that. And then the other thing too is whatever surfaces are touching in storage. So for a long time, there was the thought that you should put craft paper between your photo prints. Craft paper is relatively abrasive, and so it can rub off the surface of a lot of your prints. And so it doesn't seem like it's that abrasive, but it is just abrasive enough to have friction issues with whatever you're working with. So things like glassine, which are going to be like a thinner, like almost wax-based paper, are going to be better for like layering in between things. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, yeah. Kind of hopping back a little bit. External environment concerns are going to include things like light, which is UV exposure, fading, etc., which UV exposure and light are cumulative. They are one of the few things that even your best restoration specialist cannot fix. There's not a way to reverse light damage. So part of that is going to be considering using either not having your things out in the open for often, that or having like reprintable processes, or having UV coated glazing options. So a lot of companies now make a UV coated glass and acrylic. Both options are going to be great options. It's really important to have that UV coating on it though, because that is going to keep things from fading not nearly as fast. So things will fade. They're only, I think the best ones are 99% effective, but that is 99% that regular glass doesn't have. So that is definitely something to consider. Other things are going to be temperature and humidity, which can cause things like deterioration, cracking, water damage, mold, and insects, which are super fun to deal with. I've dealt with it, it's not a good time. Air pollution, so this can cause things like discoloration, embrittlement, or disintegration with your pieces. And like I said, insects. So some papers and stuff have cellulose in them, and insects love to eat that. And so one of the best parts about framing is that we can deal with pretty much all of these within doing framing well. There's also the internal inside of the frame package concerns. So do our mats have lignin, which is part of a wood or paper pulp, a wood thing, which is in most of our papers, that will eventually degrade and turn into acid? Is there buffer, which in general, a lot of times in order to make mats not acidic, they will include buffer in them, which is typically calcium carbonate, which is good for most things, but any of your protein-based artworks, like albumin prints, cannot be in a buffered mat because that buffer will destroy the proteins. And so you'll have the art start to like disintegrate on itself, basically. Are you using fabrics? If there's fabrics in it, are those fabrics color safe? Are they light safe? Or light fast? Also, will the color transfer if it's a paper colored mat? And some of them are not tested to see if they're transferred, and some of them will. So that's something to consider with this. The other thing is going to be like how your art is actually put into your frame. So there's tons of ways that things can be put in a frame. I've seen people scotch tape things. I've seen people like paste or like glue them in. I've seen people use contact cement. All sorts of, I've seen duct tape. But then there's also things like photo corners, which are a really nice thing that we use often. So some of these is like, is it going to affect your art if you do this? Is it going to, like, is the adhesive going to migrate? There are certain adhesives that because they don't have something in them to like hold them stable, like Scotch tape has plastic in it that helps the adhesive stop from spreading. Some of them don't have that, and so your adhesive over time will actually spread into the piece. So if you put it far enough away from your piece and it started far, that doesn't mean it's going to stay away from your piece. It might actually eventually migrate to your piece. There's also like residual damage from certain processes, like duct tape. Like it's going to leave adhesive from the duct tape. Even if I carefully peel the duct tape off, some of that adhesive is going to stay. So there's some of these considerations that are, these are a lot of the considerations that are happening inside the actual package itself. The backing, same thing, is going to have, is lignin an issue? Is acid an issue? If it's super gappy, you can have air pollution enter through that way. And then glazing, there's the potential for condensation damage. So depending on how your project is put together, if it's too close, you can have condensation damage. Additionally, if things are right up against your glazing, there's always the possible for abrasions. Even though your glass and your acrylic seem really smooth, they can still abrade certain surfaces. But like I said with the last one, there are all ways that we can deal with all of this with framing. So there are lots of things to be concerned about, but there's also a ton of ways to deal with all of them. So solutions for these. So like I said, for handling, this is white cotton. I honestly would not suggest white cotton unless you know that you're going to be using them briefly and washing them often. Light. Glazings, both acrylic and glass, have UV protective options. I would honestly suggest that for everything, especially like this art that you spent time on, that you care about. These prints, like prints are not cheap, they're awfully expensive. Getting a UV glazing option on these is really great. And again, like I mentioned with the mat boards earlier, pretty much every shop that I know, you could come in and buy a full sheet of glass. I can cut it down for you to the size that you want. You can take home the pieces. I can cut it down to as many sizes as you want and like use up that sheet the best of my abilities, that kind of thing. And we can work with you guys that way. So even if like, say you wanted to buy, like I do this a lot with my personal collection because I don't custom frame everything that I own in my house. But like sometimes I'll buy like the $20 Michaels frame, but it's on a print that I really care about. And so I will then put UV glazing in that frame. So my frame's not the best option, but I do have the thing that's most important, which is that UV. Temperature.
I'm sorry, are you gonna, I think you mentioned earlier about talking about the glazing and being reflective.
Yes.
So you're gonna get to.
Yeah, and I can honestly, I don't know that I have, I think it's in another slide, but I can kind of touch on it here too. So I didn't bring samples for that, I should have, but in general, there are 3 or 4 main types of glazing that are out there right now. You're going to have your conservation clear options, which are going to be clear glass with a UV coating on them. So it's plain glass in the middle with a coating on top that has UV protection. You're going to have options that are your museum options. Those are going to be, again, plain glass in the middle or plain acrylic. Both of these will come in acrylic options as well. With a UV coating on one side and then a anti-reflection coating on the other. So that's where you get a lot of your like super clear museum glasses where they are not as reflective as like your baseline options. I should have brought examples. Sorry, I didn't think about that. You then have reflection control options. And that is going to be your plain glass. And then they use a liquid abrasive on the backside of the glass to basically where it makes it foggy, and that helps prevent reflections. But that is like non-glare officially. Those are really nice options. That used to be like the main front line for a non-glare. The only issue with those is once you get past an 1/8 inch away from them, the glass is like a foggy almost color, and so it gets rid of your clarity. So it works really well for any of your like photographs, paper prints, that kind of thing, where you're going to have them really close to the glass. But as soon as you start adding more layers, or you have something that's like, say, a shadow box, when you get further away from it, you won't be able to see into it. And then from there, you'll have acrylic versions of those. So you'll have acrylic conservation clear, which is your baseline acrylic with, and acrylics are done slightly differently, where glass is plain glass with a coating. Acrylic, it's a chemical compound mixed into the acrylic while it's being poured. So you don't necessarily have like a UV side and a non-UV side, whereas with glass you do. And then you have the like best product that's out there, is going to be the Optium Museum acrylic, which is going to be, it's going to have all of the bells and whistles. So it has the UV protection, it has the anti-reflection coating, it's shadow resistant, it's lightweight, it has no static to it, it's static free. And then it's also like I think like cleaning resistant too, where it doesn't need to be like cleaned as often. It's harder to like get smudges on. So there's lots of options between the different things. So sorry, can you pull that up? Yeah. Okay, so a non-reflective. So it depends really specifically on the terminology that they use.
What's the question?
So sorry, can you pull it up?
Yes, absolutely.
So can you compare the differences in effect of 8% non-reflective coating versus 92 of 99% non-reflective? So, oh yeah, thank you. So there's like two considerations. Some of this is just going to be how the company chooses to verbalize it and like what sells better. So in general, like a 99% non-reflective sounds better. So a lot of times they will say that. The biggest consideration of your reflectives is going to be between a non-glare option and a anti-reflection option. Non-glare is going to be where they abrade the surface. And so it's created basically by removing the shine of one side of your pane of glass. And the other is going to be a like almost like a sticker basically on the other side that has, I'm trying to think the way to word this, sorry. It's done in a way that captures certain colors but doesn't capture others. And so it mostly comes down to those being the two differences. Past that, I can look into some certain glazings will pass certain tests. So there are a bunch of framing specific and preservation specific tests that are out there. And so a lot of these things have to meet certain specifications to pass those tests. And so they will choose the terminology that they can based on if they can pass certain tests or not. And so a lot of it comes down to the specific tests that have been run on that. And so honestly, your best way to do it is to look online. All of these companies have to say what tests they have passed. And so the best thing to do is like find the company that's saying this, figure out which tests have passed, and see what things matter to you and what things don't. I know we use, I guess I was wondering if 8% anti-glare is useful, or does it have to be 92 or better? So anti-glare in general is less of a preservation consideration and more of a aesthetics consideration. In general, the anti-glare is not doing anything for your art. It is really how it is viewed in the room with the piece. The thing that actually matters is going to be the UV protection. That is the thing that is going to affect how your art ages. If signatures stay, if signatures disappear over time, if colors start to change, etc. The anti-glares in general, like because it is very much that aesthetic consideration, it would be dependent upon if you think one looks better or the other, especially for like where you're putting the piece. Because they're not actually effectively doing something for your art, there's not necessarily a better option. I don't know if that answered their question well, but the other thing is going to be temperature and humidity. So keeping stuff in temperature controlled spaces. The other way that we do this is by keeping the art away from the glazing. So like I mentioned, there's the issue with abrasiveness of glazings, but there's also the issue of airspace within glazing and art. So the preservation recommendation is that you have 1/8 of an inch between your glass and your art. This is so that there's an air pocket there. This will allow for basically a buffer of temperature. If you have glass is more common that you're going to have condensation build up inside of a glass project. In general, acrylic is porous, and so it lets temperature and condensation in and out better. And so you're less likely to end up with condensation inside of a frame package with acrylic. But either way, if you have condensation build up on the inside of that glass, if your art is right up against the glass, it's going to go into your art. Whereas if you have about that 1/8 of an inch airspace in between, not only is it going to help prevent condensation because that airspace allows for the temperature to regulate itself a little bit better. By having that space, your art's no longer pressed up against the glass, and so condensation is not going to as readily seep into your art.
Question.
Yeah.
You talk about molds and.
Yeah, so in general, the temperature and humidity, the biggest play is going to be for mold. The biggest thing, one of the best ways to deal with this is going to be using an acrylic instead, because the condensation and water can pass through easier. In general, in Colorado, we don't have as much of a worry about mold within frames because we are at a lower humidity. But keeping it away from things like front windows where they get a lot of direct sun, where they're going to heat up and cool down rapidly throughout the day, is a really good way to prevent mold. Again, keeping temperature controlled spaces, like not storing things in your car overnight. That a lot of times gets people. The other thing that we do for this too is add those little padded bumpers to the back of your piece. So if you've ever seen them, they're like little stickers that are about 1/8 of an inch tall in the back. By doing that, this allows for airflow around your whole piece. So instead of condensation or anything building up like on the backside, or even where you get like all of the temperature hitting the front, by having that little bit of space between the wall and your art, it allows for airflow to flow completely around your piece and create a full consistent temperature around your piece, which can also help prevent mold. In general, especially like if you're doing shows a lot where you're using like, I know a lot of people will use the same frame and they'll just swap out the piece of art that's in it. That's a really great time to inspect your stuff for mold. If you're like looking through and like switching out your things, you can always take a peek and like make sure that your mat's looking good, make sure that that kind of everything is looking all right. The other way that we also prevent this is by having a dust cover on the back of it. And that can also be a really good indicator. So a lot of times we'll use a paper dust cover on the back of them. And it's basically just like a big sheet of paper that like closes it all in. Not only does that make it aesthetically look really nice, but because they're often paper, the first thing that you will notice if there's something that starts going on inside of your piece is that it's going to affect your dust cover. So if there's humidity in your piece or water in your piece, or if you think there might have been water damage in your house or anything like that, because it's so much thinner than pretty much everything else in your framing package, the dust cover is going to start to react first. So like people like who have had flood damage, or like a leak in their house and they're worried about that, we'll see that the dust cover is completely soaked and nothing inside is. It's just the dust cover. And we know that like once we see something starting to affect the dust cover, that's a sign to, okay, let's take it in, let's look through the whole thing, make sure everything's looking good. And so it's like, it's almost like a little warning sign for you, which is really nice. Something else with the dust cover is that it's going to also prevent dust, as it says, but also like other things getting inside of your things. So for example, insects. I tend to see more insect issues here than I see mold issues. I see a lot of moth issues and a lot of spiders. Especially metal frames have been super popular. Metal frames don't get a dust cover in the same way that a wooden frame would. And those almost always, every time I've ever opened them up, will have spiders in the frame. It's a good time. If you're scared of spiders, it's not fun. Some of my coworkers get really stressed out when I bring them in, so just kind of things to consider there. So to prevent, again, insects, it's going to be using a solid dust cover and then avoiding humidity. The other problem is if something has insects, if it's humid, it can encourage insect reproduction. And so then you can have more insects inside, which is not fun to deal with either. For mat boards and mount boards, using acid-free, lignin-free options are great. In general, the best, most conservation is going to be your 100% cotton options. Now, if you're going to, say, come into my frame shop and you are like, I want to decide, I'm going to pull stuff for myself and figure this out. The back of these corner samples has information. It has your brand name, the line name, it's going to have your color name, it's going to tell you the sizes of sheets that it comes in. So the standard full sheet size is going to be a 32 by 40. We also, a lot of them come in oversized, which is going to be a 40 by 60 option. But also it's going to tell you a little bit about that line, what that means. So for example, this one is made from 100% virgin alpha cellulose. So it's acid-free and lignin-free, but it is then buffered to be pH neutral or alkaline. So that would work for a lot of things and be a really good option. But say you're framing an albumin print, you're not going to want to use this because it is buffered. All of the backs of these are going to tell you their information. And I don't know if I brought any that are type. But between the different brands, they're all going to have slightly different things, but the back is going to tell you each time what it's made of. So, for example, this one, which is a rag mat, in general, your rags are going to mean that they're cotton. This one is 100% cotton and is not buffered. So this would be a great option for like an albumin print. Obviously, I don't have all of that memorized. I couldn't tell you which of these are, which aren't, but they're always going to tell you on the back of the sample what line they're a part of, what they are made of, if they're buffered, if they're not. And then they also a lot of times have like what tests and specifications they meet. So that's like your easiest way to kind of keep track of that. In general, your acid-free and at least acid-free, if not acid-free and lignin-free, are going to be listed as a conservation mat option. For hinging and mounting, it's going to be the best way to deal with those is using techniques that cause no harm to the objects. So things that are going to be completely reversible, like photo corners or edge strips, which is basically just like folded strips of rice paper that support the full edge of your piece. Museum hinging, which uses a rice starch paste and traditional Japanese kozo paper to attach to the back, or tension style mounts, which means that there's no adhesive involved, but the tension of the layers and how it's put into the frame holds it all together. Same thing for your backing boards, though, is going to be alpha cellulose or cotton options are going to be best. Fluted polypropylene, which is going to be the like fluted plastic. They sell it at Lowe's, they sell it at Ace Hardware, Home Depot. All of those are a really great option. They're really stable, and they don't off-gas or have any issues like that. And then like an acid-free or lignin-free paper to seal the back of the frame. For glazing, 98% or higher is going to meet preservation standards. Most places nowadays are all selling 99%. I know we mostly use TrueView glass or glazing options, and they carry a couple that do not have UV protection. They also carry some that have like 70% UV protection. And then they have some that are 97, I think, and then they have their 99s. We pretty much only buy 99%, just because we are very concerned about preservation where I work. So, framing at home. So, going to a frame shop is wonderful, and I love it, and I love getting to do it. But also, there's something to be said about learning how to do it yourself. There's also like some of these things, I've definitely had it where I didn't realize I was in a show, and then I was in a show and I had 2 weeks to get it framed, and not every frame shop can do that, so you gotta do it yourself. So, some preferred products and companies for things like this. So glazing is gonna be TrueView. I like their museum glass and their Octane acrylic. But they also do conservation clear glass, which is gonna be that baseline with UV protection. Both in glass and acrylic options. All of those are really great. TrueView is really wonderful to work with. And that's going to be most of your frame shops that I know of use TrueView. Like I said, you can buy a full sheet from us if you have a way to cut it down. If you don't, I have cutters where I can cut them down to size for you. So if you have a sheet and you want a bunch of 8x10s, I'll take the whole sheet and make a bunch of 8x10s for you with the whole sheet, wrap it up, and you can take all your glass home. For hinging or mounting options, Lineco is going to be a really great company to use. They are a preservation and bookbinding company. They have see-through polyester mounting strips, which are going to be like full-sided strips, which are the ones in the bottom right, which are an option. So they have like an adhesive on the back of one side and then like a piece of plastic that sticks out on the other, and it will hold your edge. Your polypropylene mounting or framing corners are always a great option. And then the more complex is going to be learning how to do museum hinging yourself. I will say museum hinging, because there is water involved, is a more time-intensive and practice-intensive process. All of these things you could do at home, no problem. Museum hinging, though, is the one that, because you are introducing water in a way, is more likely to have issues. But there's a lot of videos and information on how to do museum hinging on the internet if you are interested. And I also have some sources that could be good too. Mat boards, I personally prefer Crescent and Bainbridge mats. Both of them have a rag mat line. So Crescent has the rag mat museum line and Bainbridge has the Alpha Rag Art Care line. Both of those are going to be your 100% cotton lines. And that's what I tend to prefer to use, especially for photographs or anything that I do in preservation. Sometimes when I get a piece of art in, somebody has it and they have no idea what the medium is. So I don't necessarily know if it's a protein-based medium or not. And so I like to err on the side of caution and go with a 100% cotton option. But where do we find these? Because that's a lot, and there's not a lot of places that sell all this stuff. So Gyrie's is a really great source. They sell a lot of the stuff, especially the Lineco stuff. I know especially the store off Colorado has a huge selection of the Lineco supplies. Blick Art Materials Online is also going to have a ton of these options. They do great shipping, wonderful company to work with. The other option is your local custom framing store. Between frames, liners, mats, glasses, corners, any of the framing supply stuff, I can buy them for you, and like you can buy through us. And so we can always do that. I also have the ability, like I said, to cut certain things. So like you can buy mats through us and I can cut mats for you, especially if you have specialty shapes or anything like that. You can kind of do any of that through us as well. And I'm always happy to chat about framing and stuff too, which is fun. And then Lineco, I believe you can buy them direct. If not, they are also available through other retailers. And like I said, they are a bookbinding and framing supplier. They also do just in general preservation stuff. So they also have really good like print storage boxes and stuff like that that are really good options. So all of this is well and good, but what can preservation do? So this is an example of a project that I was able to work on in the past year. This is a World War II map that was given to a family member of someone on a submarine that they were shipping to them during World War II, where they had put flags, like punched holes and put little flags in for where they were during World War II, which they were not allowed to do. They were not allowed to tell their family members where they were. It was supposed to be entirely secret and hidden. The lady who had this map brought it into me in 5 separate pieces. So between the variety of skills that I have gained working in the preservation side of things, I was able to not only piece this back together, but frame it in a way that it will be safe and stable to go on her wall. And there are still tears in it and everything like that. Like there are holes where I couldn't get rid of, or like I couldn't fix them entirely. I was able to piece the pieces she had back together. But between using my like framing techniques to put it back together and then also using framing techniques, I was able to sort of hide those. So this matting has two different colors of mat, which you actually can't see the second color, but there's an inlaid piece behind the blue of the mat that is done to match the color of that blue. So you can kind of see it in this right picture where it says Indian Ocean. We were missing that part of the map, but by using a color that matched the color of the map or the water, it almost blends in, and so you don't really notice that there's a big hole there. Similarly, there's holes on the outside. We were able to match that sort of same tan color so that those holes are less noticeable. And so this is a piece that had been stored in a lady, I think she had it in a shoebox for a long time, but wanted to be able to display it. And so through preservation framing, we were able to do that. Similarly, these are 3 Picasso plates. He had a whole line of plates he did for a while. They're not very well known. Not a lot of people like them. But this project is done with 0 adhesive. So there's no glue, there's no tape or anything inside of that package. And this is done, this is a tension mount basically. And so there's the layers of mat on top. And then behind it, there, I think, are like 10 layers of consecutively cut layers of foam core that are cut to like follow the contour of the plates. So if they wanted to, the person could open off the back, take it out, pull off the layers of foam core, and your plates would be in there perfect. Nothing's touching them. Nothing is adhered to them. They're just held in space by those pieces of foam core.
Are they up the glass? Or are they back?
This is, they're back from the glass with the mats. So this has an 8-ply mat and then a 4-ply, which the different plies make them different thicknesses. So 8 plies are an 1/8 inch tall. 4 plies are going to be a 1/16 tall. So this puts it, 3/16 back from the glass, which this is actually, we used acrylic based on the weight of this. Overall, it's a relatively heavy piece with the 3 plates. So kept them away from the glass, but also keep them behind glass to keep them safe and also to protect that white mat on top. White mats get really dirty really easily. So having a glazing on top can also help with that. Any other questions?
If we come to your shop, you're gonna go through all of this with us, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'll go through. Here's the thing, I love framing. I enjoy it so much, and I would be happy to talk to any and all of this with people all the time. So
Hey Megan, I've got a question quick. I'm sure you're going to mention this, but thank you again for your generous offer to the club to offer us a discount on framing services through your company. We're super excited for that. You mentioned about being able to cut glazing and mats. Does that discount also apply to those services, or is it only for custom framing?
it will apply to those as well.
Jim's asking, he has a Logan Simplex Elite.
Yeah.
Mat cutter, can he use that on rag mat board?
Yeah, rag mat board cuts the exact same way as regular or the alpha cellulose mat board does. So it would work no problem. Again, the same thing with other mat boards is just gonna be having a nice sharp blade. Mitigers is an option. I run into the problem more often than not that they will have they'll buy one box of line coat strips and then they don't buy another until a month or two after. So in general, I find it's really hard to get those preservation supplies from them. I tend to find that Gyrus has a larger stock and keeps it stocked more often. With all this said too, I'm teaching a introduction to framing works on paper through Colorado Photographic Arts Center in September. This will be a entirely DIY, hands-on. You will come bring in a piece of art, leave with a framed project,
Wow.
learning all of the things in September. And so that is officially on Colorado Photographic Arts Center's website. I'm hoping to teach multiple of these sessions eventually. Currently this is like the first one that I'm doing with them, but long term we'll plan on teaching a lot of these with different things and all sorts of manners of projects. So that is definitely a good option.
Well, I have a question. What
Yeah.
is, I know that what is the turnaround time? And I know that that probably varies based on the complexity of the project, but in general.
So it also really depends on what company you buy your products from. So some of the vendors that we have are local. And so I can get stuff from them the next day. Some of our vendors I have some vendors that are Italian. And so with that, it's going to take a lot longer. In general, if you come to get a project like fully framed from us, we're at like a 2 to 4 week turnaround. Depending on what products you use, with the ability that we can do rushes. We just tend to have a big enough backlog that it would have to be rushed, basically. But if you are just trying to get products through us, it would be entirely dependent on our vendors list, which would be about 1 to 2 weeks, depending on the vendor.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Kevin, fire away with your
Yes.
more questions. Or
Yeah,
Jordan.
I'm so sorry if this is too many questions. Let me know.
No,
I
you're
can
fine.
be offline, but I think my first one is: should we account for matting overlap when we do our printing? So, like the image that we may have shared with Josh in the gallery, should we plan for a 1/2 inch of overlap if we're going to be doing some matting on that?
Yes. So if you're planning on over matting where you have a mat on top with a window cut out, the minimum overlap required to not see any white is going to be 1/8 of an inch into the piece. So, and that's on both sides. So you need to measure 1/8 of an inch or altogether 1/4 smaller than your actual image size. So for example, on an 8x10, we would actually be looking at a 7 3/4 by 9 3/4 for our window size.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
This is maybe a question for Kyle too, but a little bit of this feels like chicken and egg. Like, how do you know the size, the pricing, etc.? Like, if Josh sends us an acceptance and then we go to Megan and fall in love with her recommendation and we're like, wow, this is going to be $1,000 worth of framing, or something on there that might bring up the price or the sizing or whatever. How do we decide, like, what do we do first?
I think so. Something I think is deciding what things are the things that matter to you. Within that, like I said, a lot of my pieces at home, I don't necessarily care about having the most expensive, nicest frame and mat system on them. So a lot of mine are, like I said, like a $30, $40 Michaels frame. And then the one thing that I really care about putting is that UV protective glass on it. So I will pay to buy the glass and buy a frame at Michaels. I also have a lot of clients that they want, because matting is where you get the most for your money, they will have me cut these nice, like, fancy mats. And then they'll pop those into a Michaels frame. And that works especially well for if you have pieces that are not a standard size. I can make the matte window a perfect custom size for you, and then have the outside be that standard size so you can put it into a standard frame. So I think some of it comes down to, like, what your goal is for the project. Like, are you trying to have it be sold and sell to, like, a first-time client or a first-time buyer? Do you think that you're primarily just going to show this and want to have this frame to be able to show whenever you show this piece? I think some of it comes down to that. And then also, like, I get money is a thing, budget is a thing. So considering where you want to put that money, and also, like, framing is one of those things that there's projects that I can make a $100 project that I could also turn into a $4,000 project if I wanted to, because every layer of something can add price or complexity, both in labor and in materials and stuff, there's a lot of wiggle room, and like coming to somewhere like us, we can really work with you on that. And also, like I said, I'm happy to work with you. So like if you're like, I'm not doing a whole framing thing, that's totally fine. I have no problems with that. Let's figure out what things we want to prioritize for your piece or your collection or whatever, and what things maybe matter less to us. And we can talk through that and work through that together.
Yeah, that's amazing. And thank you for saying that about the Michaels, like adding the glass and a mat, because yeah, I didn't want to insult you with that. It was like, oh gosh, if we bring, you know, an IKEA or a Michaels frame or something, but we want to add nice glass and a mat, that makes me feel better. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Really quick. The only thing to consider with that is going to be the scale of your frame. So some of those really small Michaels frames and small like IKEA frames sometimes get really skinny. They will not support actual glass. So a lot of those will have an acrylic in them. And so we can put an acrylic, but even sometimes the acrylic that we have is like heavy enough that it would not be supported.
Okay.
So just kind of to consider. But again, that's something I'm happy to walk through with anybody and talk about. So yeah.
Perfect. And then that was
just to add to that, Kevin, I just popped in the website for the gallery, Lab on Santa Fe, into the chat. If you go there on their homepage, they list, you know, samples of the artwork, and it shows the sizes and prices that people have put on them. That might give you some ideas too.
Yeah, and talking to Josh in person was really helpful too. It's like, again,
Yeah.
what's your objective here? Are you going to frame it for something that I'm bringing home at the end of the gallery, or am I hoping to sell it for $100 and break even on,
Yeah.
you know, something, or even take a little loss? But it's like, hey, it's cool to sell something. So, and Megan, you mentioned like, yeah, price ranges. I guess I was curious. So like, you know, that 10-layer one that you showed at the beginning was really beautiful. I know that is a very expensive project because you know, so I'm just curious, like something like that versus an 8x10 black frame with basic, you know, white or black matting and, you know, let's call it UV glass or, you know, something. We're not feet flames here, just like in a ballpark on this of what we would be looking at between those two.
Yeah, so for like your bare minimum basics, I think the lowest we probably get for an 8x10, if you do all of it through us, where I'm framing everything, you're buying everything through us, would be in the 100, 150 range. And again, that's like your bare minimum basics. Something like that more elaborate 10-layer frame, I think that one specifically is like an $800 framing project.
Okay.
I will say that one's also a little more complicated because a lot of the framing that I do is for the fine art gallery, and so we don't actually separate the framing from the art itself. So like the overall price of that would be will show as higher because it would be the framing plus the art that's in it. So some of those it's a little more complicated to figure out, but like I have some frames that are like thousands of dollars of frames just for the frame themselves.
Right.
Like I said, we have some like handcrafted Italian moldings, but I also have like a lot of like really great like almost value line options too that are not going to be that pricey. And also that is to say that's not necessarily including the discount that you all are getting. But yeah.
No, that's super helpful. Okay, final question, I promise. Who's your favorite print company to work with as far as printing photos? Who do you recommend there?
I'm gonna be so real with you. I have not printed stuff since I was in college, where I was doing it myself. So I don't currently have one. As far as like, I don't know if Denver Pro Photo does printing. But I know that they're like one of my favorite companies to work with. And the man who owns that store is really fantastic. Yeah, I think that or like any of your ones that are gonna be listed as like not just like we print everything stores, the ones that are gonna be specifically like art printing or photograph printing are gonna be your better bets.
Yeah, no Walgreens, got it for sure.
Yeah, Walgreens, I know like FedEx does printing, they don't do a great job. Mike's camera's not too bad. I've had some good stuff through them.
Inglewood camera.
Yes, Inglewood camera does good too.
I love the local aspects, so that's super helpful on the Denver Pro Photo. But yeah, Megan, you're very knowledgeable. Thank you for all the time and tips and offering the generous discount. This was great.
Absolutely.
And I'll add, if for those of us who are CPAC members, you can rent time in their digital darkroom. They have 2 Canon ProGraph printers. The cheapest one, or the smallest one, retails for over $1,000. Really good quality stuff. So you can print yourself there if you want, if you're a CPAC member. And I second what Megan said about Mike's. I've had some stuff printed at Mike's. That's really good, including metal, I'll say.
Yeah, especially for the places where if you're getting something on a different substrate besides paper, I would do a lot of research, on those places too, because those tend to have more issues with print issues than just the paper stuff does. So definitely do your research for those. I know Mike's does a good job. Costco used to do them, but they do a really bad job, so I would not do them through Costco. But definitely can look into it a little bit before you go through with it, especially because some of those get expensive. Are there any other questions, friends? Okay.
I thought it was like, I don't know how it could have been more thorough, what you told us.
Believe it or not, this is actually like a very small portion of stuff that I
just scratching the surface. Okay.
Yeah. In general, like I said, I've been framing commercially, so doing full-time 40 hours a week, every week for 2.5 years, and I am still constantly learning stuff.
That's great.
Pretty much every day a project comes in that I've never seen before and have to figure out how it works.
Wow.
Which is really great. It's really fun. It's a great like problem solving kind of thing. And it's also really nice. The community of framers is a really great community. And there's so much learning and like sharing of knowledge within that community that's like really fantastic.
Right.
So yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm blown away by all the information you shared tonight. Really, truly.
Yeah, it's very helpful for all of us who are going to be displaying artwork at the gallery.
Yeah, and part of this too, like I'm happy if any of you just like want to come and talk through design options, or even like if you just want to, like if you're like, I'm thinking about doing this with my framing, but I'm not sure or whatever, like send them my way. I'm happy to look at anything. I'm happy if you just want to come in and play with our corner samples, play with our matte samples, anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Happy to help wherever I can. So
Yeah, what time do you open tomorrow?
10. And I will see you at 10.
There you go.
It's awesome.
I'll be ready with the coffee and everything. Any last questions? Okay.
All right, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Well, maybe one more question. What do you, any specific recommendations for first timers? As far as framing, what would you say to me or somebody else, say, this is what I would recommend for your first showing? Keep it basic, go elaborate, or is it just a flip of the coin?
I think it's a flip of the coin.
Okay.
I think it depends on your piece and your personal style.
Okay.
I think there are some pieces that lean towards aligning more with the kind of simplistic style. And like that classic black, white, or black frame, white matte. Especially if you're doing sort of like any of the historic processes or like nodding to historical groups or anything like that. I think like kind of leaning into that nod is a really good way to go. In general, like a white frame, black matte, or vice versa is never going to look bad. So just kind of figuring out what areas you want to like push it and play with it, and what areas you're okay kind of being like, no, simple is good enough.
Well, and I kind of figured, well, if it doesn't do well, can I still hang it on my wall?
Exactly. Well, that and
So
like,
it's a win-win.
and if- especially too, some of these, like, you could always swap in some different piece of art into it. Like, if you get home and the framing's still yours, well, put something else in there, you're good to go.
I've got several firms already do that. I call them convertible pictures.
Yeah, yeah, and we can do that too, where like I can set up, like if you wanted to, I can set up the backing in a way that you can go in and access your stuff more easily and stuff like that. So there's framing options there too and everything, so.
Good idea.
Yeah, because I know like my CPAC does pretty much, they have the same collection of frames and they'll literally just swap out what's in the frame for some of their shows and stuff, so
Yeah.
we can do that too, so. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, everyone. Good night.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. Appreciate it.